Okay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. This is Christian Peterson. This is February 27th. This is the Refi AVC meeting. And Kianga has been so kind to let me be the host today. So I will subject you to my voice for the next 30 to 45 minutes. Today I'd like to give a presentation about, or thought piece really, about regenerative finance. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Since it's going to be hard for me to read the comments and present and look at my screen at the same time, I'll just try to catch up with all the questions at the end. So my apologies in advance. And okay, and I guess before I start, do I need to, I guess I'll make this bigger for everybody so that they can see it. Slideshow. Okay, so hopefully you're all still there. Tell me if you're not. So today's discussion is about regenerative finance. The scope and focus is the stability scope, which is in MIP 101. And I've provided a quote from Lewis Carroll that says, "Why sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." And that kind of made me think a little bit about regenerative finance because it's been something that people have thought about and struggled with for years. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through an approach. This is really just my idea, nothing more. I'd like to kind of identify what I call a decentralized community as opposed to a decentralized organization. I'd like to talk about data, NFTs, and smart contracts, spend a minute about finance, talk about regeneration, and then provide a summary. To the right-hand side, there's a quote. I don't know actually if it's an African proverb, but I liked it. And it's on the wall at the departure terminal in Oliver Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg, which basically says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's an appropriate quote when thinking about decentralized communities. So what do I mean by a decentralized community? Some of you may know that I've been involved with Maker on and off probably 2.5 years. There was about 1.5 years where I was very active in the real world asset core unit, engaged in the Maker forum on a multiple times a day basis, engaged in Discord. So some of these ideas are just from that experience. And also, some may know that I was going to be involved in early on in one of the sub-DAOs, decided for personal reasons to transition. So I've had some experience thinking about what it means to have a sub-DAO, what it means to actually work in Maker. And to me, really, a decentralized community is one, I think, that needs to have a narrow, and if I may dare say, niche focus. And the reason I say that is I think there's some positives of having a very narrow focus. One is it attracts similar-minded individuals, because at the end of the day, a DAO or a decentralized community is one with people, is composed of people, whether we like it or not. Two, a decentralized community is really an idea factory. And one of the things that I find most invigorating about Maker is just the breadth of conversation and debates of ideas and the like. I think it is important to have a last point, some of the downsides, which is it's human, democratic, and messy. And I think by having a niche focus, you can direct people's focus on particular ideas or a particular concept. I think one of my challenges for the sub-DAO is really to make it easy to start and easy to close. I mean, it shouldn't, in some sense, the tooling should allow sub-DAOs to be spun up, spun down very quickly. They shouldn't be there forever. They should be tools to experiment, to see what succeeds, and to move on. And I think that's consistent with having a very narrow or niche focus. Whether you're anonymous or public doesn't matter. In either case, create value, be constructive. I think everybody that's participating needs to have a thick skin, but at the same time, when you are making comments behind an anonymous name, sometimes you feel that you can say things you wouldn't have otherwise said to somebody in their face. So, when you have a niche DAO where you're attracting similarly minded individuals, you have a directed focus. I think you can probably, be more focused in creating a value and being constructive. To the niche focus, the downside of all of this is a niche focus may limit scaling. I recognize that's potentially an obstacle. And that at the end of the day, decentralized organizations are human, democratic, and messy. That's what I liked about it. But it is both a feature and a bug. So moving on next and putting together kind of my thought piece on regenerative finance is really, it's going to be about data, NFTs, and smart contracts. And to me, the most interesting thing is there's data everywhere. There's sensors measuring things and generating data left and right in ways that a lot of us probably don't even think on a daily basis. I think one of the other areas that's going to be absolutely key for real world assets in particular to come into crypto is the focus on oracles. I don't know that there's enough discussion about how to create oracles so that, one, we get the source of truth and minimize the human touch. But that's really going to be key to this entire process. Blockchain is really just the record of what the oracle is recording. So let me give you some examples. So some of you may know, some of you may not. By practice as a lawyer, I spent about 15 years working in the liquefied natural gas space. LNG projects are large and lumpy. And I was particularly involved in marketing of LNG. And one of the things when you look into an LNG contract is, each cargo's got, anywhere, depending on the price of oil, anywhere between $35 to $40 million, $60 million per cargo. And when you deliver the LNG, what you're measuring is the heating value and the chemical composition of the liquefied natural gas. That's all being done digitally. Everything is being done digitally. And then for payment terms, you actually have typically a very short payment time between delivery, measurement testing, and actual payment, 7 to 10 days in a lot of cases. One of the things I thought about for some time is whether you could bring that payment structure into the real world asset space and provide the seller, in effect, 7 to 10 days of financing. You typically get large credit-worthy off-takers. I mean, these are the biggest energy players in the world, the Tokyo Gas, the CNOOCs, the CNPC of Taiwan, KOGAS of Korea. So, high credit quality buyers. And as a seller, you're basically taking 7 to 10 days of payment risk. That was kind of an interesting idea for me to think about. Okay, could you bring that into blockchain? Could you, for instance, could Maker lend DAI against that 7 to 10 day payment stream? Another example might be batteries and solar farms. Batteries are by definition digital, right? Electricity provides the base layer for everything that we're trying to do. And, can you find ways to record the data that is in batteries? So I spent about a year with a battery company in Norway, actually looking to bring batteries online. And one of the questions that we had asked was, could you tie a battery to a smart contract such that if the smart contract didn't get paid when it was supposed to get paid, that the smart contract could turn off the battery? And the answer was yes. That's interesting, because if your battery's turned off and you're no longer getting electricity, then it's not quite the same as taking the asset, but it's getting pretty close. So it's a way of bringing a creative way, really, of bringing enforcement from the crypto space into the real world space. You need to tie that all together with NFTs. I love looking at apes and art, but at the end of the day, for me, NFTs are really about contractual terms. You can put a PDF into an NFT, right? And you can tie a smart contract to an NFT. And I think we're not doing it, but very few people are doing it. But I think there's a future for hybrid contracts and smart contracts with NFTs and kind of smashing them together to create something new. And you actually begin to see this, and now I'm going to geek out you on lawyer stuff, but some large oil and gas companies like Shell, in some of their contracts, actually use pictures now to describe contractual terms, which I think is really interesting. A large company like Shell would be using pictures, cartoons, to describe contractual terms. So the fact that Shell is doing that suggests that you can kind of combine both words, smart contracts, and other vehicles into an NFT to create a more hybrid-like contract. And then I think we really need to find interesting ways, this will get to the regenerative part, interesting ways of using smart contracts. I think there's probably been a lot of work in the royalty space. Parametric insurance is an interesting case for me. Swiss Re has developed a parametric flood product in Kenya, basically using sensors in particular geographic areas, and if there's not been enough rain, the sensor sends a message to the contract, and the contract releases funds to the farmer. Again, we talked about smart batteries, but the concept of digital enforcement. So moving to the next, this is really just the basic finance. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but anything that we do in regenerative finance needs to, if you will, meet the basic ABCs, basic blocking and tackling. You need assurance of repayment. This is not a grant. It's not a charity. If you want to do a charity, if you want to do grants, that's a different thing. But if you're talking about finance, you need to have assurance of repayment. There needs to be compensation for the risk that's being taken. You're going to need collateralization. Most importantly, you are going to need skin in the game. Many times we came across proposals in which the proponent wasn't putting any of their own money in and didn't have anything at risk. That doesn't really work. That just sets up bad incentives. Blockchain really has the ability, and oracles combining that really has the ability to improve transparency. Frankly, I don't think that we've done enough. And I don't think, when you look at real world assets in particular, I don't think there's enough focused on transparency. And that's, in theory, what blockchain was good for, was transparency, right? But we don't seem to be really focused on that. And then together with transparency, find ways to build on the data. And I love to quote here, I don't know if anybody's read it, it's David Graeber's book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And, he contends debt is really a social relation rather than an economic transaction. And that debt is something which has been made possible through our relationships with other people. And the interesting thing about this book is he claims and shows through historical record that debt existed before money. So debt has a longer history than money. And it's really because of that societal relationship and relationship between peoples that creates debt. which again kind of gets to the concept of a decentralized community and some of the, the work that we're trying to create relations between people in a different way. So what do we mean by or what can be meant by regeneration? To me, it needs to hit on a couple key features. One, we need to have the oracle as a source of truth. We need to leverage the global data generating and processing system that's the internet, that's the blockchain. We need to think, and I'll credit my former colleague Tej with the concept of birthing new assets. Technology breaks down geography. I mean, if I don't know who's all on this call, but people are going to be on this call from all sorts of jurisdictions. We have relationships with people that we've never met. Technology also is able to scale the micro. What I mean by that is historically finance, and like everything, has been focused on large projects because you need scale. And the way you get scale is do things very big. But here we've got software that should be able to replicate things on a very quick and micro level. So I would argue that technology has the opportunity to scale the micro. And what that then does is gives the ability to either birth new asset classes because you're able to access things that you wouldn't really have ever thought of accessing because you can, or improve historically weak asset classes. And what I mean by historically weak asset classes are one where there's insufficient transparency, where you can find new patterns of value and relationship, and again, scaling microtransactions. What I don't mean by weak asset classes is just one of those, like transparency. If an asset class is financialized, and this would be my one negative comment, if an asset class is financialized like real estate or treasuries, bringing it on chain doesn't really do anything. Let's be honest. It's not. If treasuries are a multi-trillion-dollar business, if real estate is already a multi-trillion-dollar business, what exactly is tokenization doing for those asset classes? They're already financialized. And that's why I think focusing the technology on assets that are historically weak, underperforming because they're hard to access, or birthing is new assets is really where we should be driving the technology. And then just quickly a summary, and I'll go to questions. And again, since I haven't been able to read your questions, my apologies. My summary, maybe just a challenge. It's both regenerating and generating. Again, accessing hard to reach sectors of the economy, creating efficiencies where the system is wildly inefficient. I would argue that regenerative finance is more than tree or mangrove planting, albeit very good. But what about incentivizing cook stoves versus charcoal wood for cooking? So some of you may know, some of you may not. I have a passion for Africa. I've lived there. I've spent 10 years working on one of the largest infrastructure projects in Mozambique. And when you go to Mozambique and you're driving along, I was there over the summer, you're driving along and you see people all over on the side of the streets selling wood, charcoal in bags, maybe up to your waist bags of charcoal for cooking. Well, how is that really the best use of the wood? I mean, deforestation is an issue, and it's an issue because people are using wood for cooking. Rather than maybe focusing on tree or mangrove planting, maybe focus should be on incentivizing cook stoves. Focus on the use case rather than what's happened. I'm not suggesting tree and mangrove planting isn't a good idea. But when the fundamental problem is people are still using, in large parts of the world, wood and charcoal for cooking, you're still going to get deforestation because people need to cook their food. Does blockchain and crypto have a role in community savings, funeral insurance? Funeral insurance they don't call it life insurance. People at least in some African communities, it's not called life insurance because they don't want to get people feel that buying life insurance is encouraging somebody to die, whereas funeral insurance does the same thing, and it's providing for people's funerals when they die. How does blockchain or crypto have a role in that? To me, that would be regenerative. Is there a role in community savings? A lot of communities, whether it's in Africa or elsewhere, community save, right? An individual is never going to be able to save enough in their life, but they may be saving, with their families, they may be saving with their close friends. What role does blockchain and crypto have in that? And again, it gets to focusing on the micro. The software allows us to each have a phone, to each have a computer. Presumably that software will then also allow us to create opportunities in finance for these parts of the world. Really think about leveraging mobile phone penetration. I know I prefer working on my Apple MacBook versus my phone. But if you go to a lot of places, most people are doing things by their phone. And I give one example of M-Pesa, which is a cellular phone provider owned by Vodacom in large parts of Africa. And so here are three examples. Roshkash is a Mozambican company. They're providing community savings, community financial services. They're in the process of getting licensing for the Bank of Mozambique. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a small investor in Roshkash. You have Fig Finance, which is a finance company looking to bridge the gap between banks in Nigeria and mom and pop grocery stores. Your local corner store that's selling white goods, beer, flour, maybe some vegetables, some meat. Tends to be very small stores, but those stores need finance, and Fig Finance is using software to kind of bridge that gap between the banking institution who can't really provide finance in an efficient way with those mom and pop stores. And then there's Hive Network, which in some ways competitor to Roshkash. Hive Network is using blockchain and crypto to support agribusinesses and various activities in a number of countries in Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and elsewhere. So those are just three examples that I know. I'm sure there's lots more where we can think about what crypto does, what blockchain does, can have maybe a different role or maybe a new role in regenerative finance. So with that, I will stop. And if anybody's interested in the slides, I'm happy to share them. So I am still here. Julie, you asked about spinning up and winding down sub-DAOs easily. Oh, thank you. That's a heavy question. I don't offhand. In some sense, the legal risks for sub-DAOs, if they're niche and you can spin them up and spin them down easy and they're very focused, it can be kind of like whack-a-mole. The government's, there's so many DAOs that people are not going to be able to deal with them. Whereas if you have one big DAO or multiple big DAOs, they're kind of easier to target. Whereas, if you think about guerrilla warfare, right, little cells running around causing havoc everywhere, it's kind of the same concept, I think. But it's a good question, and I'd have to look more closely at the Spark artifact. I know of Spark, but I'm not familiar with some of the work that's being done there. So I'll do that. Thank you. Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah, so Bona Publica, yeah, I mean, look, it's an idea, right? I am throwing this out really just for discussion. As you know, I've not been intimately involved in what the end game has been going on, but I do think having yeah, exactly. I agree 100% with what you just put there, Bona Publica. Thank you. And yes, Julie, you can always ping me on Discord. Please, thank you.
Christian, that was really terrific. I am so aligned with all of your perspectives and talking points about what regenerative finance could be focusing on. And I have a couple of questions.
Please.
Over the past, it's almost 3 years now since I guess I've been part of the emerging meme of refi. I have not found, I found you, but I haven't found a ton of people or communities or conversations that are approaching the sector in that way. And I wanted to ask you if that's been your observation, if you've had even very much time to kind of follow projects in Web3 that identify as refi. You mentioned the mangroves and things. And so I'm just wondering kind of how you see the landscape and the opportunity for, us here at Maker, to the extent we can be a hub for, bringing in who needs to be at the table to really spur, the conversation along the lines that you presented.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kianga. I mean, to me, I see a lot of particularly in the carbon space, you see a lot of carbon sequestration, carbon-related DAOs. And I think, that's good. I think it's just a little bit jumping on the bandwagon, if I'm honest. Just to give you another example in full transparency. So I currently work for a company, a biofuels company. We're in the process of developing a project to go from corn to sustainable aviation fuel. And on a full life cycle basis, we want to make sure that the corn that we are using, it's non-edible corn, which is the easy part, but just actually capturing the entire carbon content of the entire process. And one of our divisions in the company is dedicated and working with actually Google and the U.S. Department of Agriculture in kind of gathering all this data and putting it on the blockchain. And to me, it needs to answer your question, it really needs to start at the oracle. So if people are not focused on gathering the data at the local level, like getting out into the field, meeting with the farmers, meeting with the entrepreneurs and country acts, I think it's going to be slow to happen. You do need to meet with the people in the particular jurisdictions and talk to them about their problems. and then use the technology that's there to help them solve their problems. It needs to be, and why I like mini DAOs or Republic, and I really appreciate you putting that up there, it is because it's all going to be a little bit about experimentation, which I don't know if it's best for Maker, because there's experimentation and then there's making sure you're getting repaid. So maybe mini DAOs allow lots of small little losses and wins. I don't know that's the best for Maker. It's maybe beyond my pay grade. But I think as a tool set, the idea of mini DAOs is really interesting. If Maker creates that tool set that can spawn off, that it's building around it, there's a perfect use case. But it will depend very much on the oracles, and it needs to be very much bottom up, not top down. And everything that I've seen to date tends to be top down. Sorry for negative.
Perfect. You're right. And I think the other question I have, and of course anyone who wants to come off mic and contribute to the conversation or drop your notes in the chat, appreciate you sharing that clip from, I'm not sure which scope that's from, Bona Publica, but it's a very important concept with the new endgame structure. But governance, Christian, I have a couple of questions. One of the things that's been challenging with the meetings or being an AVC is having, for the past year, having 1 hour a week. And we've been feeling our way through, of course, tons of change and transition with the pregame, figuring out just our inside baseball. What are we doing? What should we be doing? The necessity to follow and dissect the atlas, what the atlas actually is. But then, your presentation today is very much in line with more the types of, a lot of what I think would be fun and interesting and important for us to have. So my question for you then is, for governance, and you've been part of the workforce here at Maker at different times, as you mentioned. What is it that you think the governance people need to understand or need to know about the real world, right? So there is that push and pull, and then there's so much to focus on about, like, what are the Atlas rules and what are, what's a MIP and what's a this and all of those, dramatics. But then at the end of the day, the expertise, the vision, all of the things that you talked about is sort of the gate or the pathway to the impact. So what are some of your thoughts or impressions about what needs to happen in governance that's related to the outside world, and how can we resolve that political tension with all the Maker specific technicals versus, like, hello, here's what's happening in the real world, here's what the expertise is. I don't want to. I think I'm babbling at this point, but
I may get in trouble with my answer, but
you can't get in trouble here.
Oh, I can get in trouble. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I think that if Maker can really build out I think it is important for Maker to build out the tool set of what it's going to do, and I'm fairly confident that until Maker does so, the entire process is going to be too cumbersome for people to really get involved with. because people who are looking to that are not just focused on the end game, because the end game is rightly so. It's a realignment of how Maker operates, and I think until that realignment and that process is done, people are going to go slow because time is money, and I think people will see that it takes a long time to actually get things done. And that then, as somebody who works on large projects, time is your worst enemy. And I think that until Maker doesn't focus so much on the inward, or is at a point where it's not necessarily having to focus on the inward and can then again focus on the outward and demand for, whether it's DAI or the new stable, I don't know, but demand for its product or what it offers. I think it's going to be hard because customers, right? Maker needs to think of the public as its customer, and customers have choice, and customers will go to where they have opportunity to get what they need to get done. So I think until Maker comes through this internal review process, and not review, but creation process, it'll just be hard.
Yeah.
To be honest.
So then, it makes sense for us as a line voter committee to, really be focusing on the guts and the mechanics and pushing the organization, contributing our part to get to that point of readiness to where it's more engageable or useful for.
Yeah, I think the other thing you could do is, and maybe this is already out there, is as an AVC, make sure that there are clearly defined timeline and goal, and that as the AVCs, you're the, like, if you will, your AVC's responsibility, in addition to contributing to the day-to-day, is actually to make sure that the process is adhering to the timetable. Because if I have a concern, is that there'll be such a focus on the internal mechanism and discussions, and then the politics associated with those internal discussions and mechanisms, there's not going to be the urgency to go live and to actually say, okay, we're done. And I know that's the intention, that there's the end product is set in stone. Nothing's ever set in stone, but okay, the end product's set in stone. But the enemy of you can't want it to be perfect. You actually need to get the product out there. And at the end of the day, Maker is a product, and there are customers. It's not just a speaker's corner in Hyde Park, where people just say things. The purpose of Maker is to actually have a product and execute on that product. Now, doing it in a very decentralized and democratic and messy fashion, agree, but you still need to have an end goal, and I think the role of the AVC should be to focus on that, because otherwise time's going to pass. And we'll be, you'll be here 8 months from now having the same discussion, because work's hard, right? It's hard. It's hard to do.
We can be very honest here. We're all among friends. We're kind of just sort of treading water. Realistically, the transition to in-game has come with something called Launch Project, and it's been put into the Atlas and the governance that for a temporary purpose and period of time, there's just not going to be transparency about what's going on, and certain details of what's going on, and the secrecy around protecting the new brand and the strategy, etc. The Atlas has constrained AVCs in terms of, there's sort of two things we're looking at when we work on the new Atlas. We're kind of in the realm of endgame, and we're starting to talk about the role of AVCs in the endgame. But right now, our ability through the rules that are currently effective to kind of shape any timeline is like, I'd love to hear others' perspective, is kind of zero. We've struggled with even our scope proposals. I've taken and I've argued for the point of view of being extremely kind of legalistic, where the rules say the only thing AVCs should be focused on in their scope proposals is basically like provisions around advisory councils. It's this whole like circle, it's this whole chicken and egg thing that's really ties our hands. And so the experts that are supposed to advise the AVCs so that we can actually push forward policies or developments, substantive improvements in the Atlas are not onboarded. So anyway, all of which is just to say we're kind of hamstrung, and I think with refi so far, we've tried to think about what conversations we could put into the community, what we can talk about that's longer term, that's values focused, that's strategic. What does it look like to have new demand for DAI? What do we think? I think our very first meeting, it was this kind of like, okay, say poverty is solved. Poverty's ended in 50 years because of MakerDAO and DAI. How do we get there? But
that's where I think, Kianga, and to my point, where this isn't, maybe it's not for the AVC, I don't know, but at the end of the day, when it comes to your earlier question regarding why aren't things happening, like in the regenerative finance space.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think to me, what Maker really showed me was the sense of the community, right? For all of its drama, at the end of the day, it was a community. All of us are on this call, we're having this discussion. You and I have met, but I don't know anybody else here, right? And I think that's really interesting, and you can then begin to, like I said, spin off smaller subsets. And I know that may, to Bona Publica's comment, which I just think was spot on, this focus on mini DAOs to innovate new products. To me, if there was something that could be done quickly, that would be something that would be very much more outwardly focused. And then those mini DAOs, much to, I think, what the end game is about, which is, getting groups of people who are interested in a particular point. And it needs to be particular. That's why I use the term niche.
Yeah.
To focus on it. If everybody's interest is we're creating a new money, well, God, you're going to get like, I'll give you six different opinions from myself. You multiply that by 1,000 people, you're going to have 30,000 opinions. Whereas you still will have opinions. Trust me, I'm not been too old to be too optimistic. But if you have a niche like these mini DAOs, you can really focus on something very, very specific and see if it works. And how they get financed, don't know. But to me, that's maybe one area that the AVC could focus on, is really getting these mini DAOs spun up. And then you need to find people that, each mini DAO needs to live and breathe and die on its own. I mean, I'd love to do something just focusing on certain areas of Mozambique. I mean, there may be like 4 people in the world that have that same interest that I do, but hey, that could be the mini DAO, and that may be all I need. So that's why I say it really can be very niche. And I think that set of tools, if Maker can develop that, I think would be a real value to the outside world, because I don't have the technical skills. But if it's something that I can just take off the shelf and spin off on my own, I'd pay Maker a fee for that, right? I mean, so Maker could license that. There's just all sorts of different ways of generating product, but I think there needs to be focus on product. And if the product is solely DAI, fine. And if the product is having T-bills, fine. That's the product. I mean, but that's where it becomes very hard in a large organization to get alignment, because there's so many different things that can be done.
Well, I do think that Endgame really solves for a lot of what you're pointing to. And I actually want to complete the thought I raised before about where we are and not having maybe tons of detailed information. I do feel very excited and encouraged about what is being built. I mean, it's a very dense to penetrate the information and actually have a picture of what's being built, the tooling, the primitives, the restructuring of the culture and the incentives and the dynamics. I think we've made huge progress in a year. And we, even though nothing is particularly available yet for us to use, I'm sure we're so much closer. But that as much as this is takes tons of patience, once what we do know has been described and we get updates about what is being built, should provide exactly the kind of tooling, the kind of ability to scale, to experiment, like Bonacoke is talking about. But that the human element, which is the hardest part, and in figuring out the managing of the rules, Julia, as you were pointing out, how do we have all of this activity and innovation at the edges and design the rules in such a way and the incentives that, it doesn't contaminate the core, or, we don't have systemic problems because of, some of that risk-taking activity. So it's just really an enormous challenge. And I have to remind myself not to be impatient. Because once we get, this is a multi-year kind of build out, but that in that I don't know, do any of the ADs, or do we have any updated timeline about the new brand announcement? Because at one point there was Q1 was floated as when we would find out about what the new brand is, and that would come before a sub-DAO launch. So I don't know. I don't know if anything's been posted updating timelines in terms of the different phases of the rollout. But certainly from the perspective of what I've thought, MakerDAOs could be doing in addition to the AVC work is participating in that external conversation. Mike, to your point, the inward versus outward thinking, and how we can maximize our impact outward. So, some of that I feel like is, again, the holding pattern, waiting for the new brand and all of the marketing and discussion that's going to be in messaging. That's the word I'm looking for. Messaging that will be around that, and that the coherence that's designed to bring for the future of what the protocol is going to be doing is more what we can maybe all of us as participants in leverage for the external conversation. So until I feel we're there, we don't really have enough the right talking points to evangelize what we're hoping to accomplish. Cloaky's saying no update on the branding timeline.
Sorry, Canada, are there any other questions for me on my presentation? Regenerative finance generally? I'm a fool, anything?
How many impossible things before breakfast?
Exactly. 6.
You're a lightweight. Lightweight.
Yeah, depends what time I get up or eat breakfast.
Bona Public, I'm reading again. New stable demand should be left up to the sub-DAO allocator DAOs. What AVCs can do is construct a line governance strategy. Yeah, so I mean the execution of demand, but I think it's part of what AVCs or MKR holders should be contributing, coming from all different walks of life and professions. The inspiration of here's a demand, and developing, Mike, this is something we've talked about over the quarters. Like, do we see these governance strategy documents becoming like white papers, like actual scholarly research almost that could be blueprints for entrepreneurs, right? Who then might take the AVC's governance strategy and research as a cue and as information to help design, what business they want to do with the protocol, or what use they want to make of the sub-DAO model. Honestly, just don't have a ton of visibility. And I think maybe when we get to the point of the Atlas work, the review work, and hopefully there's a good way to surface that discussion or those learnings and that engagement, because I guess it's not just going to be enough if there's a small group of ADs or a small team that's writing all of this dense, deeply nested logic, if we also then don't have a way of socializing that. So will we, I have to admit, I don't have a great sense of, at the end of the day, what is the flow? What's the real impact of whatever words we write in these documents? I feel like I've heard that they're supposed to be very important in how things change or happen, but I don't know. I don't know if others on the call have a better sense of on a medium or long term, what the governance strategy and the policy documents ought to contain, how they in fact do feed into what occurs on chain. So we'll see. It's good we've had so many AVCs over the course of the year, and all very diverse and taking different points of view about what this work is, what it should be. And so that's just enormously positive. We'll learn a lot. Well, I'm referring to both, so the atlas is very clear that the product of aligned voter committees are these two sets of documents, the governance strategy and then the scope proposals. Each of these meetings that we have in the quarter, we go through each of the scopes twice. It's all at the end of the day about producing these documents, right? That's our primary contribution to governance. We know it's a work in progress. So it's just kind of riffing on what is it actually going to, how do they really function? I mean, perhaps now, it's part of the lore, it's part of the discourse that's very much influences maybe people's points of view. I mean, it's not clear that there's a lot of direct action that's coming out of the AVCs posting those documents, which is obviously why, in my mind, obviously why many AVC, a couple of the AVCs have pushed forward specific MIP amendments, because we put things in our governance strategy, in our scope proposals, and they will just sit there, right? I think my perspective at Refi is I'm kind of happy for them to sit there as we, are kind of learning and more patiently, getting our sea legs about the totality of all of these moving pieces. But then creating the culture, it's the things that LB talked about with the some of the workshops, the meta, sustaining a level of passion and vision and sense of purpose. I think we've tried at Refi over the past year to lean in on some of those things more so than kind of very nuts and boltsy, what does section 2.3.5 say? We have wanted to bring the spirit of Refi into, just this reforming that's happening of the community in ways that are, very intangible. But we take it quarter by quarter. And it's been so great that you've been able and interested to be with us this quarter, Christian and Mike, for the past couple of quarters, and others who've contributed through MakerDAOs to Refi. I'm feeling pretty good as we come to the end of 12 months of this. Amazing. Well, I don't want to. We're at time. Christian, do you want to give some final parting words to wrap up today?
No, I'm just like I said. If anybody wants my dreary slides, just let me know. But I appreciate your ears, and if you have anything struck you, just reach out to me. We're all finding our way through this, and I think that there's just a lot to build. So I'm always available to have a conversation and certainly give my opinion, for better or worse. So thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for coming. We will adjourn here and have one more meeting for the quarter. And we'll post about that over the week. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.